On landlords limiting their ability to increase rents, or would that distort an already dysfunctional market? We'll discuss this in the studio shortly, but first, this report from Tanya Sillem.
One in three of us now rents the home we live in, out of choice and economic necessity. There are few houses to buy and fewer mortgages with which to buy them. And we're travelling for jobs, mostly to Dublin. In most cities there's a rental shortage, and that's pushing the price up, especially in Dublin, where it's in double figures, almost as high as it was in the boom.
It's simple economics in that there's a huge demand for renting because the nature and the complexion of the rental market has changed and there isn't enough supply.
Rents rose most dramatically last year in the major cities. Limerick at over 3.5%, Cork up over 4%, Galway nearly 4.5%. But the biggest increases have been in the capital, up 10.9% in North Dublin, 11% in the city centre, over 12% in the South City.
Well, the main reason the rents are increasing is there's a shortage of rental accommodation in Dublin. I mean, there was an oversupply, as we know, at the end of the property crash. Very little building has taken place in the last couple of years, and the oversupply that's been there has been gobbled up.
In Dublin, there's an acute shortage of rental accommodation, with 1,500 units available to rent last year, compared to 6,700 units in 2009. Rental prices have gone up in line with demand. Simple economics. The supply hasn't increased, except in places where there's no demand.
We have lots of empty properties all around the country, but the problem is that they're built in places where there are no jobs and where nobody wants to live. So a lot of the properties that we have are in the wrong location, where there's no demand, there's going to be no economic prospects for people, so why would they live there?
Over 80% of new jobs are in Dublin, so that's where demand for rental accommodation is greatest. But wages aren't keeping up with rising rents.
Well, the implications for people who are employed whose rents are going up are that they have less money every month and they might have to move. So they probably have to move farther away from where they lived, and that then can involve things like collateral damage, such as taking kids out of school or changing schools, or having to buy a car because now you don't live close to your job and you might have to commute, or you might have to buy commuter rail tickets and do things that you've never done before, which are also more expensive.
Rising rents have serious economic implications. Most tenants can't leave the rental market. They can only move into a different one, and they take their spending power with them.
When people's incomes go down, you'll also find that their quality of life goes down, they have less money to spend. Rising rents benefit very few people, but they impact an awful lot, and they tend to impact upon the people at the lower end of the market.
The problem is most acute for tenants on the lowest incomes. There are 90,000 people waiting for a council house, most dependent on social welfare. Most of these are renting privately, but in Dublin, they're now being pushed out of even the cheapest rentals.
We're facing into a crisis where more and more people are at risk of homelessness or fall into homelessness. One of the things that we're seeing is what we would call economic evictions, where people are basically facing 20 to 30% rent increases overnight.
What do we want? When do we want it?
Last week, there was a small protest in support of Gwen Connell and her family, who said they'd had to leave their home in Blanchardstown after a significant rent increase.
I'm just looking for somewhere for the kids, for me and the girls, to be safe and close their door at night. That's all. That's all.
What I'm seeing in my area is that rents are shooting up. Landlords are seeing that there's a gap in the market, that there's a shortage of supply of housing, and they're able to use that to put up the rents to any level that they like. So what I'm seeing is that families aren't able to meet those payments and are contacting councillors about social housing, but there is no social housing.
As rents rise, those on rent supplement are being priced out of the private rental market, and that's led to an increase in homeless families.
I'm staying with my friends. My eldest daughter is staying at my mum's, and my two other daughters are staying with their dad. We've split up because we have nowhere to go. And when I say I really have tried, I've tried all different avenues to go down. I honestly don't know what's going to happen.
The government says it's considering introducing rent controls as a way of capping and regulating the amount landlords can charge. This happens in many other European countries, but critics say it's bad for housing stock and the economy.
One of the disadvantages of rent control is that it provides landlords with less money to upkeep and provide maintenance on the property. If there's less money coming into the landlord's pockets, the landlord naturally has less money to spend on the property. The second impact about rent regulation like that is that it can create a black market.
Critics, and especially landlords, argue that they shouldn't have to pay for the government's failure to address the housing shortage.
First of all, there is really no housing policy. Housing policy, such that it is a 4-page PDF, and the first page is a cover. So as a policy, it is very short on ideas and very short on targets and deliverables and things that traditionally would be in a policy. Look, a housing policy, it's no good just to have the Minister for Environment or the Minister for Housing sit down and write a housing policy. A housing policy has to be embedded in a broader economic policy.
The last time rent controls were introduced, it was the 1980s, and they were thrown out by the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean a new system couldn't work, but the first test could be whether they're constitutional.